This is definitely one of the more ambitious films of the summer, not just because of the fact that it's an original IP and not trying to either reboot something or follow up to something, but it's also borrowing from a genre that really doesn't appeal to a lot of mainstream moviegoers. I mean, when it comes to the kaiju genre and the related tokusatsu genre, it's a lot like professional wrestling. You either love it or hate it. And some people can embrace the cheesiness of it, and some people choose to kind of cast it aside because of the cheesiness. However, it's actually really refreshing to actually see a film actually take a risk, as opposed to kind of sort of take a risk and then backpedal faster than Microsoft did with the Xbox One. And that was your topical joke of, well, any episode. That's about as topical as I can get. That said, let's get started with this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. Now, the first thing I really have to say is that the story of this film really feels like something that was ripped from an anime, like something like Mobile Suit Gundam or Neon Genesis Evangelion. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, frankly, I don't care at this point, but basically it feels like something that's ripped out of an anime, both for good and for ill. For good, because it actually wholeheartedly embraces the ideas instead of kind of trying to make it realistic and more palatable to audiences. It just fully embraces what it is and basically just goes full out, full steam ahead. No BSing, like, you're literally watching giant robots fighting monsters. There's no way to really make that realistic, so we're not gonna really even try. That said, it does have the drawbacks that films based on an anime would have, where you feel like they're compressing a little too much information into one film. It's kind of got that sort of feeling where you can almost kind of divide it into the episodes of your basic mecha anime, both with the fights and with the way the characters interact with each other. But it kind of suffers from that feeling of compression where they're trying to kind of convey too much information in one sitting. And that's one thing that I definitely felt, especially with some of the characters and ideas that sounded good on paper, but really either needed to be cut out in order to make the story flow more smoothly or have their importance to the story a little bit more emphasized. Now, as for the scope of the whole thing, well, like I said, it pretty much feels like something out of an anime in terms of scope. I mean, the battles are huge, large, and epic. Granted, they do get a little frantic at times, especially if you're trying to watch in IMAX 3D and are not in the right seats. It can almost kind of give you a headache as a result, because most of the battles take place at night, and the camera, even with the smooth animation, the camera does get a little shaky at times, because, I mean, it's a fight scene. It's kind of expected for it to be kind of shaky when you're battling a giant monster, but it's definitely one of those cases where, unless you're in the right seat and are as far back away from as possible from the screen, you may expect to get a little bit of a headache if you're trying to watch it in 3D, especially in IMAX 3D, which is how I saw it. To kind of draw in a more contemporary example, this is essentially what a Transformers film is supposed to look like. I mean, this is the kind of scope and scale that filmmakers like Michael Bay only wish they could achieve. And speaking of the kind of scope and scale, this film does delve into Roland Emmerich territory from time to time. I mean, it kind of employs the tropes of Hollywood science and especially the whole cast of thousands that Roland Emmerich's films are known for, where there's like so many characters that we're following. I mean, at least we had an okay idea of who we were supposed to follow. I mean, you had the main Jaeger pilots as well as the main scientist, but even then it still suffers from the same case where there's so many characters with so many backstories, you don't really get enough time to really develop each of them, much as I would have liked. I mean, especially when you've got the two main Jaeger pilots, Raleigh and Mako. You really could have spent more of the time kind of developing how they actually, I mean, I understand there's the whole, oh yeah, well, they shared the brains and they've seen each other's memories, but I never really saw that kind of chemistry develop between them. I mean, they do have pretty good chemistry, the two actors do have good chemistry, but as characters, you never really saw that type of chemistry develop. I mean, even after like essentially sharing a brain, it's still just a case where you don't really quite see the bond develop that's almost necessary for that sort of story. So overall, I had a real blast watching this film. I mean, the fights are huge and epic and just all over the place. Even if it does kind of rival Man of Steel in terms of collateral damage, at least unlike Man of Steel, this one is actually aware of the consequences of the collateral damage. So overall, I had a blast watching this film. I mean, the action is very intense and engaging, the battles are really huge and epic, the characters, while underdeveloped, are really likable, and it feels like a really nice send-up to both the kaiju genre, as well as to just large-scale visual effects films. I mean, the film has a dedication at the end of the credits that are dedicated to the late Ray Harryhausen and Ishiro Honda For those of you who don't know, Ray Harryhausen is the visual effects artist behind Clash of the Titans, Jason and the Argonauts, essentially set the stage for a lot of the monster effects we know today, and Ishiro Honda was the director of Godzilla, the original one. But point being, it feels like a nice tribute and setup while still managing to create its own image and managing to actually make itself feel unique. And also, I like the fact that it actually understands the risk it's taking and doesn't try to cater it to like certain demographics or anything. It's just a case of, hey, it's giant robots fighting monsters. Have fun. And so, really, I really liked this film. Again, the only problems I really had were with the underdevelopment of the characters, as well as some unnecessary characters and details that really could have been excised out, and the feeling of compression as if it was adapted from a much larger script. I'm not saying that all films need to be like Peter Jackson films that you're there for like 4 or 5 hours, but it's definitely just a case where some of the details could have been trimmed out a bit to kind of smooth and streamline the story a little bit, as well as allow for some more character development with some of the more key players. So yeah, it's definitely a film that I recommend that you see in theaters while it's in theaters. I mean, I understand waiting until it's in the dollar theater. If you're going to watch it in 3D, then, well, like I said, make sure you're sitting right in the center and as far back as possible, because otherwise the intense action scenes will make you feel dizzy and give you a headache. That's the only real warning I can give you. All that said, I give Pacific Rim a 4.5 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. As for, well, later this week, I'll be presenting a review of The Way, Way Back. See you then.